Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The string quartet was still playing when the whispers began. A wedding of the year, they called it. White roses, chandeliers, cameras flashing under the soft glow of Manhattan's winter lights. But at the altar, the groom stood alone. Ethan Cole, 34, CEO of Cole Enterprises, adjusted his cufflinks once, then again. His expression did not break, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed what the crowd could not see. His bride was gone. Behind the marble archway, Mia Carter rushed through the hallway, balancing a tray of empty glasses. She had been working part-time for the catering company to pay her mother's hospital bills. The sound of heels clattering on the floor made her look up. Two bridesmaids ran past, one of them crying, mascara streaking down her face. "Wait, what happened?" Mia asked. The bride left, one of them gasped. She ran away. The tray slipped from Mia's hands, glasses shattering across the floor. A heavy silence spread as guests turned toward the noise. And that was when Ethan looked up. Their eyes met his sharp, hers terrified. Moments later, the manager dragged her into the private anteroom, where Ethan stood alone, tie undone, staring at the floor. The wedding march was still echoing faintly from the ballroom. "This is the waitress," the manager stammered. She found the note. Ethan turned slowly. His voice was quiet, measured, dangerous. "Where is she?" Mia held out a folded piece of paper. "She left this. I think she's gone, sir." He took it, scanned it once. "I cannot do this." That was all. Ethan exhaled a sound, half laugh, half disbelief. In the next room, hundreds of guests were waiting, journalists ready to broadcast every second. The merger his company had fought for months depended on this ceremony. Cancel the wedding and he would hand his rivals the victory. He looked back at Mia, eyes narrowing. "What is your name, Mia?" "Mia Carter." "You work for the catering staff?" "Yes, sir." He stepped closer. His voice dropped lower. "Miss Carter, the ceremony will continue." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean, the bride left?" "And you," he said, "are going to take her place." She froze. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious." She shook her head. "No, you cannot just... I can..." Ethan cut her off. "You will walk with me down that aisle. You will stand there until the priest says it is done. Then you will sign a confidentiality agreement and leave with a very generous payment." "I am not an actress," she whispered. "Good," he said, eyes cold. "Then play yourself. Someone honest. It will make the lie easier to believe." Outside, the organ began again, the guests unaware. The air between them thickened. Mia's hands trembled as she stared at him, the man everyone called ruthless, unshakable. But in that moment, she saw something else flicker behind his composure, where humiliation, pride, and a desperation he refused to admit. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Because you are here," he replied, "and I do not have time to lose." The next sound was the opening of the double doors. The wedding march grew louder. Ethan extended his hand, not tenderly, but like an order. "Smile. Miss Carter, you are about to marry a millionaire." Her pulse pounded in her ears. The room spun. She could have run, but something held her still. Maybe fear, maybe the strange gravity in his voice. And before she could think, she found herself taking his hand. The world flashed white with camera lights as they stepped into the ballroom together. This was madness, she thought. Absolute madness. But as she walked beside him, hearing the echo of her own heartbeat under the cathedral ceiling, a quiet question rose inside her. What happens when a lie becomes the only truth left to hold on to? If you believe love can begin in the most impossible moment, stay until the end. Because this is not a story about a perfect wedding. It is about the one that should never have happened. Now let us go back to where it all began. To her, Mia Carter, the waitress who became the runaway bride's replacement. The ceremony ended in silence so thick it felt like fog. Guests clapped politely, unsure whether to celebrate or whisper. Mia's hands shook as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. It was far too large, too heavy, like everything about this moment. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Ethan did not kiss her. He only nodded once and led her out of the ballroom with a calmness that looked practiced, not real. Inside the marble hallway, the noise of applause faded. Mia finally spoke, her voice breaking. "What just happened in there?" "What needed to happen?" Ethan replied. "That was not a wedding. That was damage control," he interrupted. "My investors are watching. The world is watching. If they think I was humiliated, the deal collapses." He turned to her fully for the first time since they had walked out. His dark eyes were steady, but beneath the surface they looked exhausted, haunted. "You said I could leave after signing something," she said quietly. "You will," he answered. "But first you need to understand what you signed up for." Two men in suits approached with folders. Ethan opened one, sliding it across the table. "A confidentiality agreement, 30 days of silence. You will keep up appearances until the merger is finalized. After that, you walk away with $500,000. Mia stared at the papers. Her throat went dry. "I do not want your money. I just want to go home. Then your catering company will lose its contract with Cole Enterprises," Ethan said evenly. "Every client they work with will hear that they breached a non-disclosure clause." Her heart dropped. He was not yelling, not threatening, just stating a fact. That made it worse. "So this is blackmail," she said. "This is survival," he corrected. "For both of us." For a long moment neither spoke. Then she reached for the pen. Her hand trembled as she signed. That night, Mia sat alone in a guest room of the Cole family estate. The mansion was silent except for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. She looked down at the diamond ring on her finger, too bright, too sharp, and whispered to herself, "What have I done downstairs?" Ethan sat in his study, the fire burning low. His assistant, Mark, stood nearby. "Sir, the media is calling this a miracle wedding. They think you replaced the bride to save the day." Ethan gave a dry laugh. "Let them. And the woman, she will play her part. Then she will leave." But when Mark left, Ethan's gaze lingered on the single framed photo of the real bride on his desk. He turned it face down. Days passed. The news feeds were filled with smiling photos from the ceremony. The world believed in the perfect couple. Behind the gates of the mansion, the truth was colder. Every morning, Mia woke early to avoid him. She helped the housekeeper, kept to herself, and tried to count the days until she could leave. But one evening, she found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, pouring himself coffee. For a man who ruled boardrooms, he suddenly looked ordinary, even tired. "You do not have to hide," he said without looking at her. "I am not hiding," she replied softly. "I am surviving." Ethan set the cup down. "You think I wanted this? I built everything on control, and in one afternoon, she destroyed it. She, my fiancée, she wanted the company, not the marriage." He exhaled, then met her eyes. "I could not let her win." Mia nodded slowly. "So you used me to prove a point." He hesitated, then said, "Yes." The honesty stunned her more than a lie would have. For a second, the space between them felt fragile, human. "I guess we are both trapped," she whispered. "Maybe," he said, glancing at the storm outside the window, "but at least we are trapped in a palace." She almost smiled. Almost. That night, she lay awake in the vast, unfamiliar bed, listening to the rain tapping against the glass. In the next room, Ethan stood at his window watching the city lights blur in the downpour. Neither of them knew that something had already begun to change. Not love, not yet something quieter. A strange awareness that in this lie they were forced to live there might still be fragments of truth, because sometimes the heart begins to soften long before the mind allows it. If you have ever tried to hate someone and failed, you will understand what comes next. Now let us return to Ethan and Mia, the millionaire and the waitress bound by a wedding that was never meant to be. Morning light spilled across the marble floor, soft and cold. A week had passed since the wedding. That was never supposed to happen. Mia stood by the window of her room, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The city below glittered like a world she no longer belonged to. Downstairs, the mansion was alive with movement. Assistants arrived, meetings were held, and Ethan Cole, her paper husband, moved through it all like a shadow in a tailored suit. They barely spoke except for the occasional polite exchange before the cameras. The public believed in their perfect union. Behind closed doors, silence ruled. That morning, Ethan's assistant knocked on her door. "Mrs. Cole, the press conference is in 2 hours," he said. Mia flinched at the title. She had never gotten used to hearing it. She forced a smile. Thank you, I will be ready. 2 hours later, she stood beside Ethan on a stage filled with flashbulbs and reporters. He spoke with practiced calm, his hand resting on the table near hers, never touching. This union represents not just a partnership in life. He said, his voice even, but a shared vision of rebuilding trust and values. Every word was measured a performance. Yet once, as he paused to breathe, his gaze flicked toward her, lingering a heartbeat too long. When the event ended, they left through the service corridor to avoid reporters. The air was heavy with perfume and exhaustion. You handled that well, Ethan said finally. Mia looked at him. You trained me well. He almost smiled. Maybe you are learning faster than I expected. Maybe you are better at pretending than I thought, she replied. For a moment, their eyes locked. Neither smiled this time. There was something fragile beneath the sharpness. That evening a storm rolled in. Mia sat in the library, curled on the couch with a book she could not focus on. Thunder echoed through the glass walls. She did not hear Ethan come in until his voice broke the silence. Do you always read when it rains? She turned, startled. Do you always work when it hurts? He froze in the doorway. What makes you think it hurts? You hide behind business meetings and screens, she said softly. That is not strength. That is fear. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the edges that the world always saw as stone. My father built this company, he said quietly. When he died, everyone expected me to fail. I promised myself I never would. And love, she asked. Love is the first thing you lose when you start making promises like that. Her chest tightened. She had seen this kind of loneliness before her mother's after her father left. It was the kind that made people forget how to be kind to themselves. Without thinking, she rose and walked toward him. Maybe, she said gently. You do not have to prove anything tonight. Her hand brushed his arm, light as breath. He looked down at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. I do not know how to stop, he admitted. Then let someone remind you. Outside, lightning flashed against the rain. Inside, silence filled the room, not cold but fragile. He did not step closer, but he did not walk away either. Later, Mia stood at her window watching him retreat to his office again. The papers, the deals, the armor, he needed them like air. Still, something had shifted. The man who had once ordered her to stand at the altar was now a man she could almost pity, maybe even understand. Days turned into a rhythm of quiet cooperation. She joined him at charity events, dinners, and press meetings. In public, they were magnetic. In private, two strangers learning the outlines of each other's silences. One afternoon, during a gala rehearsal, Mia tripped on the edge of her gown. Ethan reached out instantly, catching her before she fell. The orchestra kept playing, but for a moment time stopped. His hand lingered at her waist. His eyes softened. You were supposed to let me fall, she whispered. He shook his head. I have done enough of that for both of us. They stood like that, inches apart, until a flash from a camera pulled them back to reality. He released her, turning away too quickly. But the echo of that touch stayed. That night, Mia sat alone, staring at the contract still folded on her desk. 30 days. That was the rule. Yet every glance, every small act of kindness made those days blur into something dangerous, something that felt too real. And somewhere across the hall, Ethan stared at his own reflection, wondering when pretending had begun to feel like confession, because what started as control was becoming chaos. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cole did not want to win. If you have ever built a wall to keep yourself safe only to find someone standing on the other side, you will understand what comes next. Now let us return to them, Ethan and Mia, two strangers bound by a lie that was beginning to look like truth. The night of the gala arrived with rain whispering against the tall glass windows of the Cole Foundation Hall. The ballroom shimmered in gold and ivory. Strings played softly, chandeliers reflected on marble, and every pair of eyes followed Ethan Cole and his mysterious wife. To the world they were perfect. To each other they were a secret neither could control. Mia stood beside him, her gown a pale silver that made her skin glow under the lights. Ethan leaned close enough for her to hear. Smile, he murmured. They are looking for cracks. She managed one small but convincing. "Do you ever stop performing?" she asked. "Not when the stage is my life," he said quietly. As the evening went on, guests came and went. Champagne flowed and reporters circled like gentle predators. Mia answered questions about the wedding, about their love story, each lie polished to sound real. Yet every time Ethan's hand brushed hers, something flickered unplanned, unsettling. Halfway through the night, the host raised a glass to celebrate the new merger between Cole Enterprises and Harrington Holdings. Cameras flashed. Ethan thanked everyone with his usual composure, but when he spoke about loyalty, his voice wavered for half a second. Only Mia noticed. When the crowd dispersed, she stepped outside onto the balcony to breathe. The city glowed beneath her, 1,000 lights trembling in the rain. Ethan joined her a moment later, jacket slung over his arm. "You did well," he said. "You fooled them all." She turned toward him, her voice calm. "Maybe because I stopped pretending." He frowned slightly. Meaning, she said softly, that somewhere between your lies and mine, something started to feel real. The rain began to fall harder. Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. "Do not make this complicated, Mia." She gave a sad smile. "It already is." For a long moment they stood in silence. The city below them seemed endless, but the space between them felt smaller than it ever had. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rawer. "I did not ask for any of this, but when you look at me like that, I start to forget why I cannot." Before she could answer, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the moment. Ethan's assistant appeared pale-faced. "Sir, we have a problem. Someone leaked the marriage license to the press. They are saying she was a replacement." The color drained from Mia's face. "A replacement?" Ethan's expression hardened. "Find out who did it," he ordered. The assistant nodded and left. Inside the ballroom, phones were already buzzing. Whispers spread like wildfire. Headlines formed in seconds: runaway bride scandal, fake wife exposed. Ethan turned toward Mia, his face unreadable. "Do not speak to anyone. I will handle this." She stepped back. "You mean you will handle it by denying me, by pretending again? I need time," he said firmly. Mia's voice trembled. "You needed me to stand beside you when it protected your pride. But when it threatens it, you want me invisible again." He opened his mouth to respond, but she shook her head. "I will not be your cover anymore." With that, she turned and walked out into the storm. Reporters shouted her name as she passed through the lobby. Flashes of cameras blinded her, but she kept walking, each step louder than the last. By the time she reached the street, rain soaked through the silk gown. A car stopped beside her. Ethan's driver. "Sir asked me to take you home," he said. "Tell him," she whispered, voice breaking. "I already am." Back in the penthouse, Ethan stood before the dark window, watching the news spread like poison. His reflection stared back at him, sharp suit, empty eyes. For the first time, control felt meaningless. He thought of the balcony, the way she had looked at him like he was still human. He thought of her walking away into the rain. He picked up the contract from his desk, the paper that had once defined everything between them. The ink was smudged from his hand when he tore it in half. 30 days, he muttered. And I ruined every one of them. Somewhere in the city, Mia found herself in a small diner, sitting alone in a booth with a cup of coffee she could barely afford. The waitress behind the counter smiled kindly, not recognizing her face from the news. "Rough night?" she asked. Mia nodded. "You could say that." She turned the ring on her finger, the last trace of the life she had never meant to live. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. Back at the mansion, Ethan pressed his hand against the cold glass and whispered to the empty room, "I never meant to hurt you." But the rain swallowed his words before they reached anyone who could hear. Sometimes love does not end with goodbye. It begins there. If you have ever walked away to save yourself, even when your heart begged you to stay, you will understand what comes next. Now let us return to Ethan and Mia, the man who built his life on power, and the woman who was brave enough to break it. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the city washed clean, but strangely empty. The story of the fake bride dominated every headline. News anchors replayed the footage of the gala, freezing on Mia's face as they spoke about betrayal scandal and a millionaire's humiliation. Inside the Cole mansion, the phones would not stop ringing. Ethan sat at his desk unmoving, watching the screen without really seeing it. His assistant spoke quietly in the corner. "The board wants a statement, sir. Investors are panicking." Ethan's voice was hoarse. Let them, I have nothing left to protect. He dismissed everyone and walked to the balcony. The sky was pale gray, heavy with the smell of rain. He thought of the words Mia had thrown at him about pride pretending and being invisible. He had told himself he was saving the company, saving his reputation. But somewhere between his anger and her courage, he had lost the one thing he could not buy back her trust. Across town, Mia stood in a thrift store trading her ruined gown for a worn sweater and jeans. Her phone buzzed non-stop, filled with reporters, producers, and strangers demanding a comment. She turned it off and left it behind on a park bench. All she wanted now was silence. A week passed. The headlines cooled, but the damage stayed. Ethan avoided the press and buried himself in work. At night, when the office lights dimmed and the world went quiet, he would catch himself looking at the empty chair across from his desk. It had become a habit he could not stop. One evening, his assistant entered hesitantly. "Sir, there is something you should see." He handed over a printed article. It was about a small community shelter opening downtown, funded anonymously, providing meals and job training for underprivileged women. At the bottom was a blurry photo of a woman handing out food. Her name was not mentioned, but Ethan knew that face. He stared at it for a long time. Then, without a word, he stood, grabbed his coat, and left. The shelter was in an old church near the river. He found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, helping a young girl fix a broken coffee machine. She froze when she saw him, disbelief written all over her face. "You should not be here," she said quietly. "I needed to see you," he answered. "To say something I should have said long ago." She turned away. "If you came to fix your image, you are wasting your time." "No," he said. "I came to fix what I broke." For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise of laughter from the next room drifted through the doorway, women and children talking over dinner. The kind of sound Ethan had never heard inside his own home. "I read about what you are doing," he said softly. "It is good work. It is honest work," she replied. "No contracts, no lies." He took the hesitant step forward. "You were right about me. I was afraid of losing control, afraid of being seen as weak. But the truth is, I have never felt weaker than I do now." Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. "You do not get to walk back into my life just because you regret what you did." "I know," he said, "but I am not here to take anything from you. I came to give something back." He reached into his pocket and placed a small envelope on the table. Inside was the torn contract, now taped together, but stamped void. Beneath it, a check. She did not touch it. "I do not want your money, Ethan." "I know," he said quietly. "It is not payment. It is a donation to the shelter in your name. The rest of the world will never know, but I will." Mia looked at him for a long moment. There was no anger left, only exhaustion. "Why now?" she asked. "Because," he said, voice almost a whisper, "you were the only thing real in a life built on pretending." For a second, silence filled the space between them. Then someone called her name from the kitchen, breaking the spell. She turned to leave, but Ethan spoke one last time. "I am sorry, Mia. Truly." She paused in the doorway, rainlight catching the edge of her hair. "Maybe one day that will be enough," she said. Then she was gone. Ethan stayed there long after she left, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade. When he finally stepped outside, the first drops of rain began again, soft and forgiving. He tilted his face up toward the sky and let it fall. Sometimes redemption does not arrive as applause or forgiveness. Sometimes it is a quiet moment when you finally stop lying to yourself. If you have ever wished for a second chance not to change the past but to prove you have grown, you will understand what comes next. Now let us return to Ethan and Mia, the man learning to be human again, and the woman who had already moved beyond the pain he caused. Weeks passed quietly after that night at the shelter. The tabloids moved on to new scandals, and the city forgot about the millionaire and the waitress who once shared a wedding that was never real. But for Ethan Cole, forgetting was impossible. Every board meeting, every glass of whiskey at midnight, every silence between the tick of his office clock reminded him of her. He no longer cared about the merger. He let his lawyers handle the negotiations. What he could not delegate was the ache of knowing he had driven away the only person who ever saw through his armor. He spent his mornings walking through the park near the river, the same one that looked down on the shelter where Mia worked. He never went inside, but he always stopped by the gate, watching from a distance. One morning he found the gate locked. A sign read, "Temporarily closed for renovation." The building looked worn, paint peeling from the windows. Ethan frowned and called his assistant. "Find out who owns that property," he said, "and call a contractor. I want it restored." By the end of the week, construction crews arrived. They repainted the walls, replaced the flooring, and repaired the roof. Mia returned a few days later, confused to see the changes. The contractor handed her an envelope. Inside was a note written in Ethan's familiar, precise handwriting. "You built something beautiful here. Let me help you protect it. EC." Mia stared at the words for a long time. She wanted to be angry, but she could not. The truth was, part of her missed him too, his steady voice, his impossible confidence, even his silence. Still, she had promised herself not to fall back into the gravity of his world. That evening, as the volunteers cleaned up, a black car stopped outside the gate. Ethan stepped out, no cameras, no security, just him. "I told you I did not need your help," she said before he could speak. "I know," he replied. "I helped anyway." She sighed, crossing her arms. "You never listen." "I am learning," he said softly. "That is why I came, to listen this time." The rain began to fall again, just like the night everything had fallen apart. They stood under the small awning, the sound of drops filling the silence. "Mia," he said finally, "I cannot change what I did, but I can choose what I do next. I thought success meant never bending. You showed me that strength is knowing when to bow." Her eyes met his. "Words are easy, Ethan. You have always had the right words." He nodded slowly. "Then let me show you something real." He motioned for her to follow. Hesitant, she walked beside him to the car. When they stopped in front of a new building across the street, she froze. It was smaller than the mansion, but elegant, lined with glass and soft light. On the sign above the entrance were the words, "The Carter Center for Women and Children." Her breath caught. "You named it after me?" He shook his head. "No, you built it. I just made sure the world could see it." For the first time, his voice was not cold or commanding. It was humble. "I know I cannot erase what I did," he said, "but I can build something worthy of the person you helped me become." Mia felt the sting of tears. She turned away, trying to hide it, but Ethan stepped closer. "You taught me that love is not about control," he said quietly. "It is about respect, and I will spend the rest of my life proving I finally understand that." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain softened, and the sound of city traffic blurred into the distance. Then Mia whispered, "You are not the man I met at that wedding." "I know," he said. "You changed him." A small smile touched her lips. "You are still stubborn." He smiled back. "You are still brave." She looked at the building again, the sign shining faintly in the streetlight. "If this is real, if this is not another performance, then maybe we can start from here. No contracts, no pretending." He nodded. "From here." They stood side by side, watching as the lights inside the center flickered on for the first time. Somewhere inside, a piano played softly from a volunteer, setting up the next day's event. Ethan reached out carefully, not to claim her hand, but to offer it. She hesitated, then took it, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Sometimes redemption does not come with grand gestures or public forgiveness. Sometimes it begins quietly, under a gray sky, between two people who finally understand the cost of pride. If you have ever lost everything and still found the courage to rebuild, not to impress the world, but to make peace with yourself, you will understand what comes next. Now let us return to Ethan and Mia, the man learning how to love without control, and the woman teaching him what love truly means. The opening of the Carter Center became a quiet headline one morning, far from the noise of scandal that once followed Ethan Cole. No reporters mentioned their past. They only wrote about a new space for women, children, and second chances. Mia walked through the lobby that day, sunlight spilling through the tall windows, watching volunteers unpack books and supplies. Every corner carried her touch, the warmth she had always given freely, now made visible in walls and light. Ethan arrived later, dressed simply, carrying a box of donated laptops. He looked almost out of place among the laughter and chatter. When Mia saw him, she smiled faintly. "You did not have to come," she said. "I wanted to," he replied. "I am done hiding behind people who do things for me." He followed her through the hallway where photos from the shelter's early days hung on the wall. One of them showed her in an apron laughing as she stirred a pot of soup. He stopped in front of it, eyes soft. "You were never meant to be someone's replacement," he said quietly. "You were always the original." Mia paused, unsure how to respond. The weight of his words filled the space between them, gentle and real. "You do not owe me poetry, Ethan," she said, though her voice trembled. "It is not poetry," he said. "It is truth." For a moment, everything slowed, the noise of children playing in the next room, the hum of lights above them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small wrapped in velvet. "Before you say anything," he said, "this is not what you think it is." Inside was the ring from their fake wedding, the diamond still glimmering, but somehow smaller now. He set it on the table. "This ring once stood for everything false about us," he said. "If you will let me, I want to replace it someday with something real. But only when you believe I have earned it." Mia looked down at it, speechless. The memory of that chaotic day at the altar flashed in her mind, the fear, the confusion, the humiliation. And yet, now standing here, she felt none of that. Only quiet peace. "Ethan," she said softly, "you do not have to earn forgiveness. You just have to live differently." He nodded slowly. "Then that is what I will do." Outside, the sound of rain began again, soft against the glass. They stood by the window watching the streets glisten. "You know," she said, smiling, "I used to think storms ruined everything." And now, he asked, "Now I think they wash things clean." Ethan glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Then let us call this our first clear day." She laughed quietly, and for the first time it sounded free, no tension, no fear. Just two people standing side by side, no contracts, no conditions. Sometimes love does not arrive with fireworks. It comes back quietly through trust rebuilt one day at a time. If you have ever watched someone become better, not because you demanded it, but because they chose it, you will understand what comes next. Now let us return to Ethan and Mia, two souls, learning that redemption is not the end of the story, but the beginning of something honest. Months passed, and the Carter Center became more than a building. It became a living story, one that belonged to both of them. Ethan spent his mornings there, fixing computers, helping with donations, and learning the kind of work that did not come with applause. For the first time, he saw success measured not in profit, but in people. Mia watched him quietly, half in disbelief, half in admiration. The man who once controlled everything now carried boxes, cleaned tables, and smiled at strangers who did not know his name. One afternoon, she found him sitting outside the center, surrounded by children drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. One little boy tugged his sleeve. "Mr. Ethan, draw something." Ethan hesitated, then knelt down and drew a simple heart. The kids cheered. Mia stood in the doorway, arms crossed, trying not to smile. "So the great Ethan Cole can draw hearts now," she teased. He looked up, grinning. "Only because someone taught me how." They walked together along the river after closing that evening. The city lights shimmered across the water, calm and slow. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked. He thought for a long moment before answering. "I miss who I thought I was, but I do not miss who that made me." Mia stopped walking. "You have changed," she said quietly. Ethan met her gaze. "No," he said. "You changed me." She looked down, flustered, unsure how to respond. "I did not plan to," she murmured. "I know," he said, stepping closer. "That is what makes it real." The air between them grew softer. The streetlights flickered against the rain-slicked pavement, wrapping them in quiet gold. He reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a folded paper. "What is this?" she asked. "The merger contract?" He shook his head. "No, something better." He handed it to her. Inside was a deed transferring full ownership of the Carter Center to her name. At the bottom was his signature. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she asked, stunned. "I am giving you what you built," he said simply. "You do not owe me anything anymore." Tears filled her eyes. "You could have just told me," she whispered. "I wanted to show you," he replied. "You once told me love is not control, it is freedom." So here it is. Mia held the paper against her chest, speechless. She wanted to thank him, but words felt too small. "You are not walking away, are you?" she asked softly. He smiled, shaking his head. Not unless you tell me to. For the first time, she took his hand, not out of obligation, not to calm the chaos, but because she wanted to. Then stay, she said, but this time stay for the right reasons. He nodded, eyes warm. For you, for what we are building, for the truth. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and new beginnings. Somewhere behind them, laughter from the children echoed like music. Sometimes the greatest apology is not made with words, but with action, the quiet kind that rebuilds what pride once destroyed. If you have ever learned that love is not about holding on too tightly, but about letting someone choose you freely, you will understand what comes next. Now let us return to Ethan and Mia, the man who gave everything away to earn nothing but honesty, and the woman who finally chose to believe him. Spring returned to the city quietly that year. The trees along the river bloomed early, their petals scattering across the water like soft reminders that some things grow stronger after the storm. The Carter Center was thriving. The laughter of children filled its halls, and volunteers came every day to help. For the first time in a long time, both Ethan and Mia felt that peace did not have to be loud to be real. They worked side by side, often in silence, but it was a comfortable kind, the kind built from understanding. There were no cameras now, no headlines, just the hum of life and the quiet rhythm of people being good to each other. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Mia found Ethan in the courtyard setting up tables for a charity dinner. He looked up when she approached. "You should not be doing that alone," she said. He smiled. "I am not alone anymore." Later that night, the event began. Guests filled the courtyard, lights strung overhead like stars. When the speeches ended, the crowd clapped for the founders of the center, Ethan Cole and Mia Carter. She took the microphone first, thanking everyone for believing that kindness could change lives. Then she turned to him and said softly, "And thank you, Ethan, for proving that people can change too." The audience clapped again, but for a moment all he saw was her. When the dinner ended and the guests drifted away, Ethan found her sitting on the steps beneath the lights. "You were incredible," he said quietly. She smiled. "You were not bad yourself." He sat beside her, hands resting on his knees. "Do you remember the first time we stood together under a ceiling full of lights?" She laughed softly. "Yes, I was terrified." He looked at her with warmth. "And now I am home," she said simply. He reached into his pocket and took out a small box. She froze. "Ethan." He opened it slowly, revealing a simple gold ring, nothing like the extravagant diamond from before. "No contracts," he said, "no audience, no pretending, just us." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Completely," he said. "The first time I asked you out of pride. This time I am asking you out of love." For a moment she said nothing, only watched him with the same steady calm that had once disarmed him completely. Then she smiled through her tears. "Yes," she said, "but this time I am saying it because I choose to." He slid the ring onto her finger and the lights around them seemed to glow brighter. The air carried the sound of laughter and music from inside the center. For once, Ethan did not think about his past mistakes or the company he once ruled. He thought about her hand in his, the peace in her eyes, and the life they were building together, not out of obligation, but out of truth. Sometimes love does not arrive perfectly. Sometimes it begins with a mistake, grows through forgiveness, and ends with a choice. If you believe in second chances, if you have ever learned that the truest love is the one built after everything falls apart, then you already know how their story ends. Ethan and Mia did not just finish a wedding. They finished a cycle of pride and pain and began something new, something honest. And as the night breeze moved through the courtyard, he looked at her and whispered, "This time it is real." She smiled back, holding his hand tightly. "Yes," she said, "the best mistake we ever made."